The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains in our modest living room, casting soft patterns across the worn hardwood floor. I was curled up in the armchair with a book I had already read 3 times, the kind of story where the girl never gets picked until, miraculously, she does. A comfortable silence enveloped the house, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of the antique wall clock and the occasional rustle of pages. And then the doorbell rang. It was unusual for anyone to visit us without notice, especially on a Wednesday. I hesitated, placing a ribbon to mark my page, and glanced at the hallway. Before I could get up, footsteps thundered down the stairs. My sister, Elena, appeared in a flash, her curls bouncing, her phone still in hand from whatever drama she'd just been narrating in her room. "I'll get it," she called out unnecessarily and flung the door open. There, standing on our small front porch, was a man in a navy uniform holding a thick white envelope sealed with a wax crest. His expression was unreadable, polite, perhaps a bit aloof, the kind of man you only see in luxury hotel lobbies or political documentaries. He handed Elena the envelope with a slight bow. "For Miss Eleanor and Miss Amelia Winters," he said, then turned on his heel and walked back toward a sleek black car idling at the curb. Elena blinked, stunned. She tore the seal with impatient fingers and gasped. I rose and approached slowly, already bracing myself. Elena only gasped like that when something social or sparkly was involved. "It's from the Ashworth Foundation," she breathed. "We've been invited to the Winter Gala." My heart skipped a beat. The Ashworth Foundation Winter Gala. It was the event of the year. A gathering of high society, celebrities, politicians, and heirs to old money and new empires. To be invited was a rare honor. For us, 2 sisters from a small town whose parents ran a failing antique store. It felt like a mistake, a fantasy, a joke. Elena was already dancing in circles. "Oh my God, do you know what this means?" she shrieked, holding the invitation above her head. "Do you know who goes to this? It's the place to be seen." I took the envelope gently from her hands and read over the embossed lettering. It was addressed to both of us. There was no mistake. "But why would they invite us?" I asked aloud, my voice barely more than a whisper. Elena didn't care. She was too busy calculating how many new dresses she could beg our father for before the weekend. Over the next few days, our house transformed into a frenzy of preparations, or at least her half of it did. Elena visited boutiques, tailors, salons. Every surface in her room was covered in fabrics, sequins, and shoes. She documented every decision on social media. Which Jimmy Choo's guys, classic black or silver? Sparkle, and preened in front of every mirror in the house. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in my room with the invitation in my lap, feeling a growing sense of unease. I wasn't like Elena. I didn't have the right clothes, the right voice, or the right friends. I had no stylist to call, no collection of designer shoes. What was I going to wear? My budget was essentially non-existent. Our parents could barely cover bills this month, and I wasn't about to ask for something frivolous. So, one cold evening, I opened the cedar trunk at the foot of my bed, the one that used to belong to my grandmother, and pulled out the dress. It was a simple navy blue number with capped sleeves and a modest A-line silhouette. It didn't scream for attention. It whispered. The fabric had a faded elegance, and it fit me just well enough to not need altering. It had been my grandmother's. I had worn it once before, to a school recital, and now it would have to do. The next morning I showed it to Elena, hoping for encouragement. Her response came in the form of a stifled laugh. "Wait, that's what you're wearing to the Ashworth Gala?" I shrugged, trying to stay calm. "It's all I have." Elena covered her mouth dramatically and pretended to faint on the couch. "Oh no. No, no, no," she said, shaking her head. "You'll be a ghost in that room, Amelia. Invisible, or worse, pitied." I felt the sting of her words, though I knew she didn't mean them to be cruel, not entirely. Elena had always been a peacock. I was the shadow behind her feathers. "It's just one night," I muttered. "I'll be fine." But Elena wasn't finished. "You know what? Maybe it's better if you don't come," she said, twirling a bracelet on her wrist. I mean, if you're going to look like that, it might hurt our image. People talk. I stared at her. This was my sister. The girl who used to braid my hair and sneak cookies into my room. And yet here she was, slicing into me with glitter-coated knives. I am going, I said firmly. I don't care what I look like. Elena rolled her eyes and turned back to her phone. As the night of the gala approached, I grew more nervous. Not because I feared the spotlight. I was used to being invisible. But because I dreaded the whispers. The comparisons. The looks that said, she doesn't belong here. Then, on the morning of the event, something unexpected happened. I was sitting at the window with a cup of tea when a car pulled into our driveway. Not just any car, a vintage silver Bentley with tinted windows. A tall man in a black coat stepped out. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him. He approached the house and knocked softly. I opened the door, unsure of what to expect. "Miss Amelia Winters?" he asked. "Yes?" He removed a dark envelope from his coat. It had no crest, just my name, written in beautiful cursive. "This is for you, and there's someone who wishes to speak with you." I took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'll be honored if you let me accompany you to the gala tonight. I owe you more than you know." See, my mind raced. Was this a prank? Then I looked past the man to the car, and for the first time, the door opened, and he stepped out. Tall, striking, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to carry every storm I'd ever weathered. He adjusted the cuff of his dark suit and nodded at me. Recognition hit like lightning. It was him. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about tonight, about myself, began to change. The knock on the door still echoed in my ears long after. The man, and the man behind the invitation, had left. I stood in the same spot, frozen, my fingers gently gripping the envelope as if it might vanish if I let go. I reread the note at least 5 times, each time wondering if I had misunderstood. But the handwriting remained unchanged. The invitation was real. The man was real. And apparently he wanted to go to the Ashworth Gala with me. I could hear Elena upstairs, her hairdryer roaring like a jet engine, blissfully unaware of what had just occurred on the porch. I closed the front door slowly and leaned against it. The cool wood grounding me. What did he mean by, "I owe you more than you know"? I hadn't seen him before, not knowingly. And yet, when he looked at me, there was a familiarity in his eyes, something that made me feel like I'd missed a key detail in a very important puzzle. I walked to my room and shut the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the dress, still hanging from the hook on the closet door. The navy blue fabric caught the afternoon light, revealing soft folds and slight wear around the seams. It was far from glamorous, far from something anyone would expect to see at a ball filled with designer labels and glimmering couture. And yet, I had already committed. He said he would accompany me. But even now, my self-doubt whispered, "Are you sure this isn't some kind of cruel joke?" Still, I knew deep down he wasn't mocking me. There was sincerity in his gaze, a calm confidence that disarmed the loudest fears inside me. For once, someone looked at me without seeing my sister's shadow. I got up, took a breath, and removed the dress from the hanger. The scent of cedar from my grandmother's chest still clung to the fabric, a comforting reminder of warmth, strength, and quiet dignity. I ran my fingers along the seams, imagining her wearing it in her younger years. She had always been someone who believed in subtle elegance, in letting kindness and character outshine appearance. That night, I tried the dress on again in front of the mirror. It still fit. It wasn't perfect. The hem was slightly frayed, the zipper a bit stiff, but it hugged me in all the right places. With a soft scarf, a vintage pin from my grandmother's drawer, and some careful hairstyling, it could work. I turned sideways in the mirror and tilted my head. It would work, and if it didn't, well, at least I wouldn't be pretending to be something I wasn't. The next day was a whirlwind of activity. Elena was everywhere, flitting from mirror to mirror, curling her hair, trying on earrings, sending voice notes to her friends about how tonight would be unforgettable. "You better not embarrass me," she warned as she walked into my room uninvited. Her gown, a floor-length crimson creation, shimmered with crystals that caught the sunlight like fire. "I mean, you're really going to wear that?" I stood up straight and faced her. "Yes," I said simply. She looked me over and raised one sculpted brow. "You know what? Fine. Be invisible. At least then no one will be looking at you long enough to judge." She smirked and left, her heels clicking like punctuation on the end of her insult. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then shook them off. I took out my grandmother's vintage pearl hair clip, secured it above my left ear, and gave myself one last look in the mirror. Looked like me. Maybe not a movie star or a supermodel, but me. And that, I decided, was enough. At 6 o'clock sharp, the silver Bentley pulled up again. This time, Elena noticed. "Oh my God," she said, peering through the blinds. "Is that someone famous? That car? Who's it for?" I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped into the foyer with my dress and scarf, a soft pair of ballet flats, the only elegant shoes I owned, and my small clutch. My heart was pounding in my chest as I walked past her. The door opened before I could touch the handle. He stood there, dressed in an impeccable black tuxedo. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his sharp jawline was softened only by the warm smile he gave me. "Good evening, Miss Winters," he said, his voice low and smooth. Elena blinked. Wait. You're with her?" He extended his arm to me, and I accepted it with trembling fingers. "Yes," he replied without even glancing at her. "She is the only one I'm here for." Elena's jaw dropped, but I didn't look back. We walked to the car in silence, and once inside, I finally turned to him. "I have to ask," I said, still breathless. "Why me? Why tonight?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Because you once saved someone's life," he said, "and you didn't even realize it." I furrowed my brow. "What do you mean?" He looked out the window for a moment as the city lights began to flicker to life outside. "Years ago, I was at my lowest. I was sitting on a park bench, questioning whether I had anything left to live for. You were walking past, reading a book. You dropped something, a bookmark. I picked it up, and it had a quote written on it in your handwriting." He paused. "Sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life." That's what it said. You smiled at me when I handed it back. Just a small smile. But it changed everything. I went home that day and decided to try again. I sat in stunned silence. I don't even remember that," I said. He turned to me. "I do." The car pulled up to the entrance of the Ashworth Foundation. Photographers lined the red carpet. The buzz of conversation, the flash of cameras. It was a completely different world. He stepped out first, then turned and offered me his hand. I took it, and the moment I stepped onto that carpet beside him, the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, heads turned, voices whispered, people strained to see who the unknown girl in the simple dress was and why she had arrived with him. And then, somewhere in the chaos, I heard a familiar voice. "Elena Winters, who is that girl with Mr. Hartwell?" I turned slightly. Elena stood near the entrance, her mouth open, her complexion suddenly pale. She stared at me in disbelief, and then she fainted. The ballroom spun around me, not in a dizzying, disorienting way, but like a carousel of colors, light, and murmured astonishment. My hand still rested on Mr. Hartwell's arm, though my thoughts swirled elsewhere. Elena had fainted, actually fainted. I didn't know whether to feel concern or vindication, maybe both. Somewhere behind the velvet ropes and press cameras, she was being helped up by two stunned attendants while murmurs rolled through the crowd like waves after a sudden splash. "You okay?" Mr. Hartwell leaned in, his voice warm and steady. I nodded slowly, still trying to absorb everything. "I think so. That was a lot." He smiled gently. "I understand. It'll settle soon. But just so you know, you've already outshone half the people here." and we haven't even made it through the door." That made me laugh, and the sound felt like a release. A thread pulled loose from years of restraint, worry, and second-guessing. The moment we stepped into the ballroom, the change was palpable. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, bathing the space in a soft golden hue. Grand floral arrangements flanked the entryway, and the marble floor reflected the swirl of designer gowns and black tie elegance. I expected people to stare. What I didn't expect was for them to smile. A woman in emerald silk touched my arm as we passed. "I love your dress," she whispered, before disappearing into the crowd. A pair of executives nodded respectfully as Mr. Hartwell greeted them. One of them turned to me and said, "You must be the reason he showed up tonight. We haven't seen him at a public event in years." I blinked, stunned. "Oh, I didn't know that." He leaned in, amused. "You must be someone very special." That word again. Special. It landed differently now. We moved toward the grand staircase that overlooked the center of the ballroom. Mr. Hartwell led me to the edge, his arm still securely around mine. Below, music played from a string quartet, the lilting melody filling the air with a dreamlike grace. A waiter offered us champagne. He declined, but I took one, more for the comfort of having something to hold than the drink itself. "This place is..." I trailed off, searching for the right word. "Intimidating," he offered. I chuckled. "A little." He gestured toward a quieter corner near the windows, where golden light spilled in soft columns across the tiled floor. "Want to breathe for a moment?" I nodded, grateful. As we walked toward the windows, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the grand mirrors. The dress, once a relic tucked away in a cedar chest, now shimmered faintly under the chandeliers. My posture had changed, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. I barely recognized myself. We stood near the window in silence for a few minutes, the distant sounds of laughter and clinking glasses creating a bubble around us. It was only when I turned to him again that I finally asked the question that had been forming since he'd appeared at my door. "Why me?" He looked at me, his expression gentle. "I told you," he said. "That day changed everything for me. I was ready to disappear, and you reminded me I existed." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "But you didn't know me," I whispered. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't need to know someone to be saved by them." I looked down at my glass, the bubbles rising like tiny stars. I had never thought of myself as someone capable of impact. Not in that way. I was used to blending in, letting Elena shine while I hovered in the background. And yet here I was, standing beside one of the most powerful men in the country, at one of the most prestigious events of the year, while my sister, the dazzling, always right Elena, was unconscious in the entry hall. The irony was delicious, but guilt crept in too. "I should probably check on her," I said quietly. He nodded. "Of course, I'll come with you." "No," I said, touching his hand. "If she sees you again, she might faint again. Let me go first." He smiled. "Fair point." I handed him my glass and made my way toward the entrance. As I passed, through the crowd more faces turned. Some recognized me from the red carpet. Others just followed the ripple effect of curiosity. I ignored them as best I could. I found Elena seated on a velvet bench just outside the main doors. A glass of water was in her hand, her cheeks pale and her lips pressed together in a tight line. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "You," she said coldly. I stopped a few feet away. "Are you okay?" I asked. She glared at me. "You knew." "Knew? What?" "That he was your date, that you'd show up and humiliate me." "Elena, I didn't know he'd be here until this morning. He showed up at the house." She laughed bitterly. "Of course he did. And you just said yes?" I said yes because he was kind, because he remembered something I did, something I didn't even remember doing. She shook her head. "This was supposed to be my night. I didn't come here to ruin it." "No," she snapped. "You came to steal it." I stared at her. "You made fun of me, Elena. You laughed at my dress, told me I shouldn't even come. I was going to sit in the back, be quiet, stay invisible. But for once, someone saw me, and you hate that." Her face reddened, but she didn't deny it. I took a step back. "You can come back in. Pretend nothing happened. I won't get in your way. But I'm not leaving." She said nothing. I returned to the ballroom. Mr. Hartwell was still waiting by the window, right where I'd left him. "Well?" he asked. "She'll be fine," I said softly. "But I don't think we'll be talking for a while." "I'm sorry," he said. I shook my head. "Don't be. This is the first time I've ever felt like I wasn't just a shadow." He extended his hand again. "Then let's dance, Miss Winters." I hesitated. "I don't know how," I admitted. "I'll teach you." And he did. Right there, under the golden lights and watching eyes, I danced with a man I barely knew. A man who remembered a moment I had forgotten, who had seen me not for what I wore, or who my sister was, but for a kindness I didn't even know I'd given. And in that moment, I realized something. The dress didn't make the night. I did. The song ended, and as the final notes of the string quartet faded into the murmuring crowd, we slowly stepped apart. My hand lingered in his for a moment longer than necessary, and when I looked up at him, I found a softness in his eyes that unnerved me more than any stranger's gaze ever could. He smiled again, not the confident, curated smile of a man used to boardrooms and photo ops, but a sincere one, touched by something deeper. "You dance well," he said, his voice low and kind. I laughed softly. "That's generous." He leaned in. "You didn't step on my foot once. That puts you above half the guests here." For a few minutes, we wandered back to the refreshment table, where he handed me a glass of something pink and sparkling. I took a cautious sip, surprised at the taste, light and sweet, with a hint of rose. A floral whisper on my tongue. "I have to ask," I said finally, unable to hold back the curiosity any longer. "Why now?" He looked at me thoughtfully, as if measuring how much truth to release at once. "Because I saw your name on the guest list," he said simply. My eyebrows rose. "You saw the guest list? I sponsor the Ashworth Gala," he replied. "Quietly, from behind the curtain. I usually don't attend, but when I saw your name, it felt like a sign, like I owed it to myself, and to you, to come." Stared at him. "That bookmark," I murmured. "You're saying it changed your life?" He nodded. "I don't expect it to make sense to everyone," he admitted. "It was just a moment, one tiny, almost forgettable moment. But it arrived when I needed it most. I had just left a toxic company I'd built, walked away from people I thought were my friends. I felt like I was nothing. Then, that day in the park, I saw someone who looked whole, quietly confident, peaceful. You dropped your bookmark, and when I read it, it felt like a message from the universe. I tried to wrap my mind around it. I had always believed that small things mattered, but never imagined that something so small could change the trajectory of someone else's world. You could have just sent a thank you note," I teased, still a little stunned. He grinned. "I thought about it, but I didn't know your name back then, only your face. It wasn't until years later when I saw a local article online about your family's antique shop that I recognized you. And now, he said, placing his glass down, I want to offer you something more than just a thank you." My breath caught in my throat. "More?" He hesitated, then took a step closer. "Would you come work for me?" I blinked. What? "Not because I owe you," he said quickly, "but because I've followed your work, your writing, your social posts, even your contributions to the community. You have insight, honesty. You're the kind of person I want on my team." I stared at him, stunned. "But I'm not. I don't have a degree in business or finance." "I'm not looking for a degree," he said. "I'm looking for someone who understands people, who sees value in the overlooked, who remembers what it's like to stand on the outside of a room full of power." "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Say you'll think about it," he offered, that soft smile returning. I nodded slowly. "I will." He exhaled with visible relief. That's all I ask. For the next hour, we circled the gala together, and I watched how people looked at him with awe, envy, reverence. And then they looked at me, the girl in the understated dress, with something new, curiosity, even respect. He never left my side. At one point, Elena re-entered the ballroom, her face carefully composed. She saw us and froze. Her friends clustered around her, whispering. She raised her chin and turned away. I felt the twist of pain in my chest. We had once been so close. Sisters who whispered under covers and shared secrets in the dark. Somewhere along the way, that had vanished, lost to ego, attention, maybe even fear. But I couldn't chase her tonight. Not tonight. By the end of the evening, I found myself in a quiet courtyard just outside the ballroom, the city lights stretching, far and wide like a field of fallen stars. Mr. Hartwell stood beside me, silent, thoughtful. "You said I saved your life," I said at last. "But you saved something too." He turned to me. "You reminded me," I said, "that I could matter." His eyes searched mine for a long moment. "You always mattered," he said. "You just needed someone to tell you." A cool breeze stirred my hair, and I felt the weight of the night settle over me. Not heavy, but warm, grounded. He offered me his coat, and I accepted it. As we walked back into the light and laughter, something in me shifted, not suddenly, but like a sunrise slowly creeping over the edge of a long, dark horizon. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe I wasn't just the girl in the simple dress. Maybe I was something far more difficult to define and far more powerful to become. The Ashworth Foundation's grand ballroom had seen its share of royalty, industry moguls and headline-grabbing celebrities, but nothing quite prepared the evening's guests for the sight of him walking in with me. Christopher Hartwell, elusive billionaire, former CEO turned philanthropic powerhouse, was known for avoiding the public eye. There were no red carpet interviews, no late-night talk show appearances, no exposés, just a string of powerful ventures, charitable investments, and whispered admiration from people who wished they could claim they knew him. Until now, he stood beside me in the entrance corridor, just beyond the ballroom's towering double doors, his hand lightly resting over mine, as if anchoring me to something solid. I could hear the hum of conversation and the subtle vibrations of a waltz echoing inside, but it all faded beneath the rhythm of my heart. "Ready?" he asked. No, I wasn't. I was terrified, but I nodded. "Let's give them something to talk about," he said with a wink. And then the doors opened. Golden chandeliers blazed overhead like frozen fireworks, showering the ballroom in warm light. Dozens of guests swirled across the dance floor, and hundreds more stood in glistening clusters near the edges of the room. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The orchestra missed a beat before regaining its composure. And then, like a current, the energy shifted. Christopher Hartwell had arrived. But it wasn't just him they stared at. It was me. For a second I panicked. I imagined the judgment in their eyes. She doesn't belong here. Who let her in? I reached instinctively for the hem of my modest navy blue dress, wishing I could stretch it into something more worthy. But then he squeezed my hand. Just a gentle pressure, subtle but grounding, reminding me I wasn't invisible. I wasn't an accident. I was chosen. And with that thought in mind, I lifted my chin and walked forward, step by deliberate step, into the lion's den. Gasps rippled across the room like dropped stones in water. "Is that? No way. That's Christopher Hartwell. Who's the girl? She looks like no one. I don't recognize her. Where did he find her?" I could hear the murmurs as we passed, half awe, half confusion. But the more they whispered, the stronger I felt. The dress that once made me small now felt like armor. The room that once intimidated me now felt navigable. Across the floor, I spotted Elena. She stood frozen, flanked by her entourage of glittering friends. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand, and the corners of her mouth tightened as she watched me approach. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw it all in her expression: disbelief, humiliation, and beneath that, something else: fear. I didn't smile. I simply passed. Christopher guided me to a small raised platform at the far end of the ballroom, where Ashworth Foundation officials stood beside a podium. A tall woman in a velvet gown took the microphone and beamed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice slicing through the golden hum, "we are honored tonight to welcome one of our most private yet generous supporters, Mr. Christopher Hartwell." Polite applause scattered around the room. Then silence. He stepped forward. "Thank you, Margaret," he said with his trademark quiet strength. "Tonight is about celebrating hope, opportunity, and the unseen kindnesses that shape our lives." He turned his head just slightly toward me. "And sometimes," he added, "we forget that the most profound moments come from the simplest acts." Another pause. Then he took my hand. "This evening, I'd like to introduce someone who represents everything I admire: quiet resilience, compassion, and authenticity. Her name is Amelia Winters, and if you don't know her yet, you will." A collective murmur swept the room. He kissed my hand lightly before stepping back. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I had just been introduced by Christopher Hartwell to the entire elite of the city, not as a date, not as a footnote, but as someone worth knowing. The woman at the podium smiled and ushered us down. I barely felt my feet touch the floor. People began to approach us: politicians, CEOs, media figures. Some greeted him with respectful nods, but most looked at me with the wide eyes of stunned curiosity. A magazine editor with bright red lipstick leaned in and whispered, "You'll be on every cover by morning. Who are you, really?" I didn't have an answer. Not one she'd understand anyway. We moved through the crowd like we belonged, and maybe, for the first time, I did. Later, we found ourselves back at the refreshment table. A waiter offered us chocolate-dipped strawberries. I took one, then turned to find a young woman watching me intently. She looked a few years older than me, dressed in couture, her posture perfect, but her eyes kind, not calculating, not jealous, just curious. "You look beautiful tonight," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "What's it like?" she asked. "To be chosen by someone like him?" I glanced at Christopher, who was now talking to a small group of donors. I smiled. "It's not about being chosen," I said. "It's about being seen." She nodded, thoughtful, and drifted away. As the night wound down, we found a quiet corner near the windows again. My feet ached and my cheeks were flushed, but my heart was calm. I looked out at the city skyline and said, "I'm not used to this." He stepped beside me. "Neither am I." I glanced at him. "You were amazing up there. So were you." We were silent for a moment. Then he said, "This is just the beginning, Amelia." I turned. "Of what?" He looked at me with that stormy, unreadable gaze, then softened. "Of something that matters." And for once in my life, I didn't question it. You could almost hear it. The second Elena's mind connected the dots. I wasn't just some girl in a plain navy dress. I wasn't just her quiet sister who wore hand-me-downs and kept her head down. Was the woman entering the Ashworth Gala beside Christopher Hartwell. I was the name he spoke into the microphone. I was no longer invisible, and that realization was enough to knock the ground from under her feet. I hadn't noticed the exact moment. She fainted. I was too caught in the swirl of introductions, too focused on making sure I didn't trip over my own shoes or mispronounce someone's name. But the hush that fell behind us as we exited the platform, the sudden commotion near the bar, that was the giveaway. Later, someone whispered the details. How Elena's champagne flute slipped from her hand, how her legs buckled as she gasped, and how two stunned servers caught her just before she collapsed to the floor. She just dropped like a stone, a woman in emerald sequins told her friend at the refreshments table. 1 second she was standing, next second, bam. I thought it was an act. Someone else chimed in. But she turned white as a sheet, a third said. Must have been real. I didn't know whether to feel mortified or vindicated. As whispers spread like wildfire, I tried to keep my composure. Mr. Hartwell, ever the composed presence, noticed immediately. He leaned in discreetly. Is she okay? He asked gently. I think she'll live, I replied, unable to stop the dry edge in my voice. She's your sister, right? I nodded. He didn't press further. He didn't have to. I could feel the waves of tension rolling off every corner of the ballroom. The powerful wanted to know who I was. The envious wanted to tear me down. The curious wanted a piece of the story. And Elena? She was trapped in the middle, a queen deposed from her social throne by the one person she never saw coming, me, Anu. Hour later, I saw her again. This time she was seated in a lounge off the main floor, flanked by two of her best friends and a glass of something sparkling that no one dared call champagne. Her cheeks were still flushed, but there was fire behind her eyes now. When she saw me pass with Christopher, her expression twisted into something unreadable. Shock, hurt, and underneath it, the jagged edge of something that looked like betrayal. I stopped. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have kept walking, continued floating through the night like the unexpected star of a Cinderella story. But I couldn't just ignore the ghost of our sisterhood sitting there, fragile and fuming. I turned to Christopher. Give me a moment? He nodded and stepped back with an understanding smile. I approached Elena's seat, ignoring the wary looks from her friends. You okay? I asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, after a beat, she muttered, Peachy. Elena, you humiliated me, she hissed, not bothering to lower her voice. In front of everyone. I blinked. I didn't do anything. You walked in with him, Amelia. Him. You let me make a fool of myself, mocking your dress, laughing at you, while you knew you'd be escorted by the most powerful man in the room. I didn't know until that day, I said honestly. He showed up at our house just like that. You were too busy FaceTiming your friends to even notice. She narrowed her eyes. You should have told me. I tilted my head. Would it have made a difference? Silence. Look, I said, softening my tone. This wasn't about you. I didn't plan any of this to spite you. It just happened. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper. A wound torn open. You were always the quiet one, she whispered. The sweet one, the background. I said nothing. I liked you in the background, she added, her voice bitter. Because when you're in the background, I get to shine. That hurt more than anything she could have said. And now? I asked gently. She swallowed. Now I'm the sister who fainted. I'm a joke. You're not a joke, I said firmly. But maybe, just maybe, it's time we stop defining ourselves by who gets the spotlight. She looked away. I waited for a response, but none came. I stood for a moment longer, then turned to walk away. I didn't expect an apology. Not that night, but I hoped one day she might understand that I hadn't come to steal her crown. I had simply remembered I could wear my own. Back at Christopher's side, the night resumed its rhythm. A second dance, another round of whispered introductions, and then, as the orchestra played its final song, he leaned toward me. Want to get out of here? He asked. I nodded. Outside, the cool air felt like a baptism. The sky above was clear, scattered with stars, and the city lights stretched endlessly toward the horizon. His driver opened the door to the Bentley, but I hesitated. Wait, I said. Christopher paused, watching me. I turned to him. Before tonight ends, can you answer just one more question? He smiled. Of course. When you saw my name on that list, I said, what made you really come? He didn't hesitate. Because, he said, I remembered the girl who gave me hope, and I wanted her to remember herself. That simple. That honest. I stepped into the car, not as the sister in the simple dress, but as the woman who had finally realized she had always been more than enough. The morning after the gala, the world woke up, and it had something to say. I knew something was off the moment my phone buzzed off the nightstand before the sun had fully risen. At first, I thought it was Elena, perhaps ready to continue the conversation we'd left unfinished. But then the buzzing didn't stop. One notification, then 5, then 30, then more. Text messages, missed calls, app alerts, emails. Blinked at the screen. Google alert. Who is Amelia Winters? You've been tagged in 78 photos, Amelia. Is this you? You're on the homepage of 3 sites right now. Girl with the blue dress breaks. The internet. Harper's Weekly. The most talked about guest at the Ashworth Gala wasn't on any VIP list. I sat up slowly, clutching the sheet around me like a shield from the digital avalanche. I wasn't ready for this. In one night, I had gone from nobody to someone, and the world had noticed. I climbed out of bed, still in my soft pajamas, and padded into the kitchen, phone in hand. My dad was at the stove flipping pancakes like it was just another Saturday morning, but even he glanced up with raised brows. "Someone's popular," he said, nodding toward my screen. I held it up. "Have you seen this?" He chuckled. "Your sister hasn't stopped texting me since 6. She's in full panic mode. Apparently you've overshadowed her Instagram debut dress." I sat down at the table. "But I didn't even do anything, Dad." He placed a plate in front of me and ruffled my hair. "You were yourself. Sometimes, that's all it takes." I stared down at my pancakes. I couldn't eat. My stomach was a swirl of nerves. I opened one of the articles. A photo of me and Christopher. Walking in together took up most of the screen. My hand on his arm, my navy dress softly lit by the chandelier's golden light. The caption read, "Mysterious Beauty, the girl who stole the gala, and Christopher Hartwell's heart." I groaned. I wasn't used to being seen, let alone analyzed. Scrolling further, I found quotes from guests. She was quiet, elegant, like someone out of a different era. I've never seen Hartwell smile that much. Ever. I thought, she was an actress in disguise. There's no way she wasn't planted. I dropped the phone on the table. "What do I do now?" I whispered. My father poured coffee into my mug and sat across from me. "You breathe, and you stay true to who you are. The world spins whether you like it or not. You just decide how you stand on it." It was good advice, but things escalated quickly. By noon, journalists were outside the shop. 2 camera crews staked out across the street. One woman even tried to come in pretending to be a customer, but I caught the tiny microphone clipped to her jacket lapel. My inbox flooded. Brand offers, interview requests, podcast invites, modeling agencies, even a small film production company. Wanting to option my story, it felt surreal. But beneath the whirlwind, one message stood out. A short text from an unknown number. "You okay?" "See." I smiled. My reply was simple. "Trying. Want to meet?" 15 minutes later, his car pulled up outside my house. He didn't come in, just waited quietly in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, coat folded neatly beside him. As I slid in, I looked at him. "I think I'm in trouble," I said. He smiled faintly. "Welcome to the club." We drove to a quiet spot by the lake, hidden from the streets, and sat there in the silence, watching the light shimmer across the water. For once, there were no cameras, no whispers, just air and clarity. "Why, didn't you warn me this would happen?" I asked softly. He took a long breath. "Because I knew if I did, you'd say no." He was right. "Is this what your life is like?" I asked. He nodded. "Mostly, but I've learned to tune it out." "I don't know how," I admitted. "You don't have to know right now," he said. "Just don't lose the reason this started." I looked at him. "And what was that?" He turned to me, eyes sincere. "A girl who reminded me that kindness still exists, that simple can be powerful, that showing up, quietly, honestly, still matters." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the horizon, the sun now arching toward its descent, painting everything in warm amber. Then I asked him the question that had been building since the night of the gala. "Christopher, Are you doing this because you feel grateful, or because you feel something more? He paused. When he finally answered, it was soft. Careful. I felt grateful the day I saw your face in the park. That was years ago. What I feel now is more than that. My heart beat faster. I want to know you, really know you, without the cameras, without the headlines, without the pressure. Just us. I smiled. I want that too. We sat in quiet agreement. Back home, I avoided social media. I knew Elena was still spinning. She had posted a long story denying she had fainted, calling the photos doctored and taken out of context. Her friends were defending her, but people weren't listening. The focus had shifted, and no one, not even her, could shift it back. But I didn't feel victorious. Not really. This wasn't about beating Elena. This was about being me, finally and fully, and figuring out what came next. The flashbulbs would fade eventually. The whispers might never stop. But I had something stronger now. A sense of self, a beginning, and a man beside me who saw more than just the dress. He saw me, the whole me. And that, I realized, was the rarest thing of all. The frenzy faded, but the questions didn't. By the third day after the gala, I had done something I never imagined I'd do. I turned off my phone, not silenced. Not put on Do Not Disturb. I shut it off completely and placed it at the bottom of my drawer, beneath my notebooks and scarves. It buzzed even in my dreams. I needed silence, but the silence brought something else, space to think, about him, about us, and most of all, about why this all started. It wasn't just a moment of kindness in a park. Something deeper was circling around his words, something unspoken. The way he looked at me during quiet moments, the wistfulness in his voice when he mentioned my name. The invitation had been sudden, yes, but it hadn't been random. I felt it, so I asked. We met again that evening, this time not at the lake or a restaurant or beneath chandeliers. He took me to a glasshouse garden on the edge of the city. It was closed to the public that day, but of course Christopher Hartwell had keys. The sun was just beginning to set. Golden light filtered through ivy-covered glass panes, and orchids bloomed in quiet corners. It was the kind of place where time slowed. He walked beside me in silence until we reached a quiet bench nestled beneath a curtain of white roses. I knew I'd have to tell you eventually, he said. I turned to him. Tell me what? He exhaled, slowly, and looked at the flowers above us. The day I met you, it wasn't just a coincidence. I frowned slightly. You said it was a park, that you were sitting alone, and I walked past with a book. It was, but there's more. His voice softened. I'd just come from a courthouse that morning. I had signed documents severing ties with my father's company, Hartwell International. You've heard the headlines, right? Corruption, insider dealings. It was everything I didn't want to be. I nodded slowly. Everyone had heard. The scandal had rocked the business world. I wanted out, he continued. But walking away from billions doesn't come with applause. I lost everything. Friends, influence, identity. I sat on that bench feeling like no one. And then you saw me. He nodded. You were reading a book about astronomy. You had no makeup on. You looked peaceful, like the world hadn't broken you yet. And when you dropped your bookmark, I saw the words on it. He looked at me now. You probably don't remember what you wrote. I shook my head. He pulled out his wallet and carefully unfolded a small, worn card from one of its slots. My breath caught. Sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. I stared at my own handwriting, a quote I'd written on dozens of bookmarks I used to sell at the antique store, more as a hobby than anything. I kept it, he said, not because I believed it, not at first, but because I wanted to. I felt my throat tighten that night. I looked up your name. It was on the receipt taped to the back of the bookmark. Your full name, phone number, and the name of the store. And then I remembered your face. I started following your work from a distance. Quietly. I read your blog posts, Watched you help your parents run that shop. Read the articles you submitted to local journals. You were so sincere. My voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever say anything? He shrugged, his eyes distant. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to interfere in your life. You had your world, and I had mine. I thought maybe that small act, the bookmark, the smile, was enough. But then I saw your name on the Ashworth guest list. He looked at me again, this time with something deeper in his gaze, and I couldn't stay silent. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. All this time I thought he'd chosen me randomly, that I was a lucky stranger in the right place at the right time. But no, I had been someone to him long before he was someone to me. He had watched me live, quietly, respectfully, and in doing so, I had become something stable in the chaos of his world. I don't know what to say, I whispered. He leaned in. Don't say anything. Just understand this wasn't charity. I didn't choose you out of pity or guilt. I chose you because you reminded me of who I wanted to be. We sat there in silence, the air thick with everything that had gone unsaid until now. Then I turned to him with a soft smile. Can I confess something? He nodded. I didn't remember the bookmark, but I remember the man on that bench. I noticed you. His brow rose. You did? I laughed gently. You looked so sad, so lost. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid you'd think I was nosy. He shook his head. You saved me without speaking. That's power. We stayed in the garden until the stars began to appear above the glass ceiling. It was peaceful, real, a moment far removed from tabloids and flashing lights. Just two people with tangled lives and a connection stronger than either had understood until now. As we prepared to leave, he took my hand. I don't know what this is between us, he said. Not yet, but I know it's real. And I want to keep exploring it, if you'll let me. I nodded. I want that too. We stepped into the night hand in hand, and for the first time since the gala, since the cameras and the headlines and the whispering world, I felt grounded. Because the truth behind the invitation wasn't about fame or spectacle. It was about a quiet moment in a park, and the way a simple act of kindness had stitched itself into someone's soul. It started with whispers behind closed doors, then came the slammed doors, the cold dinners, the silences thick as fog. Our family had always prided itself on being close, a united front despite financial hardships, eccentric uncles, and the occasional explosive Thanksgiving. But in the days after the gala, when the media called for me, when customers entered our antique shop just to catch a glimpse of me, the fragile thread holding us together began to fray, and the unraveling started at home. It was a Thursday evening, 3 days after the truth about the gala invitation had gone viral. Christopher and I had just finished another quiet walk by the lake, a habit we were beginning to fall into, when I returned home to find Elena seated at the kitchen table with my mother. Neither of them spoke when I entered. Hi, I offered, placing my bag gently on the counter. Elena didn't respond. My mother gave a brief nod, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. The air between them felt cold. Not the kind of cold that came from anger, but the kind that came from comparison, from resentment. I'll go upstairs, I said. Already turning. You've changed. The words came from Elena, flat but cutting. I turned back. No, I said quietly. I haven't. You just didn't see me before. My mother cleared her throat, attempting diplomacy. Girls, please. She's everywhere, Mom, Elena snapped. Every news outlet, every headline. Even Aunt Marjorie posted about her on Facebook. Our Amelia, the belle of the ball. Do you know how many people asked me about her today? At my job. I stayed quiet. You always liked being invisible, she added bitterly. It suited you. You let me take the spotlight because you were too afraid to stand in it. And now that I have? I asked. She stood suddenly, knocking her chair back. Now I have to live in your shadow, she said. The same shadow that used to live in mine. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? You're not in anyone's shadow, I replied. You're just not the center anymore. Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She stormed out, heels echoing down the hallway like a judge's gavel. My mother sighed and took a sip of tea. "You could be more sensitive," she said, not unkindly. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said. She looked up at me. "I know. But that doesn't mean it didn't change things." I sat down across from her. "Do you feel that way too?" She hesitated. "It's hard," she admitted. "We built this family around Elena, her energy, her ambition. And you were always so easy, so calm. You never needed anything." "But I did," I whispered. "I just stopped asking." My mother looked at me, really looked, and for the first time I saw something like guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I never realized how much we overlooked you." We sat in silence, the weight of years pressing gently against the space between us, and then came the knock on the door. When I opened it, I found my father standing there, pale, disheveled, a crumpled envelope in his hand. "I need to talk." "To you," he said. I let him in. He handed me the envelope, sealed in wax. I broke it open to find a printed letter, an official one. It was from a lawyer. Notice of interest, Amelia Winters. Ari, potential claim to estate of Caroline Hawthorne. "Read it twice. Who is Caroline Hawthorne?" I asked. My father sighed. "Your grandmother's sister," he said. "Estranged. We never talked about her. She married into money, left the family behind. Your grandmother never forgave her." "Why would I get a notice from her estate?" He hesitated. "Because apparently you're named in her will." I stared at him. "But why me?" "We don't know," he said. "She passed away last year. The estate took months to sort. The lawyers are just now reaching out to the beneficiaries." "Did you know her?" He shook his head. "Only stories. That she was proud, private, that she regretted not staying close." I looked down at the letter. There was no number, no figure, just a summons. I would have to appear in person. The next day, I stood in a lawyer's office on the 18th floor of a glass tower I had never been. Inside, the room smelled like leather and dustless shelves. The lawyer, a man with a soft beard and sharper glasses, smiled politely. "She left you the estate," he said simply. I blinked. "The whole estate?" "She never had children, no spouse. She followed your life for years. She even clipped your article about the antique shop. You reminded her of herself." I sat down slowly. "I don't understand." "She left a note," he added. He handed me a folded page, yellowed slightly at the edges. I opened it with trembling fingers. "To Amelia, the only one who stayed soft in a world gone hard. I've watched from afar, hoping one day you'd remember that some of us see what others ignore. May this give you the freedom to choose your own path." My vision blurred. "She knew me," I whispered. He nodded. "Better than most." The following evening, when I told my parents, the atmosphere shattered. Elena screamed. "She got what?" My mother stared in stunned silence. My father sat with his head in his hands. It was no longer about Christopher. No longer about the gala or the dress. It was about power, position, inheritance. I had stepped out of the shadows, and now I was holding the keys to a legacy no one saw coming. And that's when the masks slipped. My mother tried to reason with me, to suggest how I might distribute parts of the inheritance to support the family. Elena threatened to leave, to cut ties, to tell the world who I really was. My father just drank in silence, but I finally saw them all clearly, their flaws, their wounds, and I saw myself, not as the echo in their story, but as the woman at the center of her own. Inheritances are rarely just about money, they're about history, identity, the unseen contracts we sign with our past and the expectations that come bundled with blood. And for the first time in my life, I had to choose between honoring a family that had never truly seen me, or stepping into a future I never thought I deserved. The letter from Caroline Hawthorne changed everything. The estate was sizable, far beyond anything I'd imagined. A house on the coast, several trust funds, antique collections, and a portfolio of investments. The lawyers explained the details in calm tones, but my heart pounded the whole time. I wasn't just invited into wealth. I was expected to carry it forward, but no amount of wealth could protect me from the backlash that followed. "Elena says you're leaving the shop," my mother said 2 days later, her voice clipped and tired. "I haven't decided yet," I replied, quietly stacking dishes in the sink. "Well, if you do, just remember this family built that place from nothing. You don't get to walk away and pretend you're better than us." I stopped and turned. "I've never said that." "No," she said, "but you're acting like it." Her words stung because they came not from anger, but fear. Fear that I was slipping away, that the girl they overlooked was now too far ahead to follow. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said softly, "but I need space to think, to choose for myself." My father said nothing. He hadn't said much since the lawyer's visit. I wasn't sure if he was ashamed, relieved, or simply overwhelmed. Elena, meanwhile, had gone full scorched earth. Her social media feed was filled with cryptic captions. Some people pretend to be humble until they have something to flaunt. Sisters make the worst rivals. Be careful who you trust, especially when they smile with secrets. I tried to ignore it, but it hurt. Every line was a wound from someone who used to share my pillow on stormy nights. I confided in Christopher that evening, our voices soft beneath the glow of streetlights. "I don't know what to do," I said. "If I accept this life, I lose them. But if I stay, I'll never stop shrinking to fit their comfort." He reached for my hand. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you want to run away from them, or towards something better?" "Thought about it. I want to live my life without needing to apologize for it." He smiled. "That sounds like a good reason to start over." We sat in silence for a moment, his thumb tracing slow circles on the back of my hand. "You could come with me," he said suddenly. I looked up. "I mean it," he added. "I have a property upstate, peaceful, beautiful. We could go together. Take a break from all this noise. You could figure out what you want, without everyone's opinions pressing on you." It was tempting, but it scared me. If I leave, it'll confirm everything Elena's been saying. He looked at me with steady eyes. "You don't owe her your silence, or your smallness." The next morning, I went to the antique shop one last time. It was quiet. Dust motes floated in the air like lazy ghosts. The bell above the door gave its usual chime. I walked slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of polished wood, brass clocks, and ceramic vases. The place had shaped me. It had taught me patience, storytelling, and how to find meaning in things others discarded. But it was also a prison. I stood at the counter where I'd spent countless afternoons behind Elena's sparkle, behind Mom's voice, behind the register, and I whispered, "Thank you." Then I turned and walked out. That evening, I told my family I was leaving. "I need time," I said. "Not forever, but enough to understand who I am, without all of this pulling at me." "You mean without us?" Elena asked coldly. "No," I said. "I mean outside of you." My mother's lips thinned. My father stayed silent. Elena just stared. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said after a long beat, but her tone was hollow. "I hope you do too," I said. And then I left. Christopher was waiting by the car. We drove in silence for a long time, away from the city, away from the pressure, away from the mask I'd worn for years. The house was tucked into hills of golden grass, wrapped in pine trees and silence. No cameras, no gossip, no expectations. Just air that smelled like morning. He gave me the guest room. Let me unpack in peace. Cooked pasta that night and opened a bottle of wine neither of us could pronounce. "This doesn't have to be anything more than what it is," he said. A pause. A choice. "I know," I replied. "But maybe it's the first choice I've made for myself in years." Over the next days, I read again. I walked through trails. I sat by the window and wrote in my journal, not for anyone else, but for me. Christopher worked from the patio or sometimes just sat beside me, quiet, present. We didn't talk much about the media frenzy or inheritance or Elena. We let the silence heal, and then one morning I woke with clarity. I walked down to the garden, found him trimming an old fig tree and said, "I'm ready." He looked up, brushing dirt from his hands. Ready for what? To stop living someone else's version of my life. He smiled, not triumphant, not smug, just proud. "And where do we go from here?" he asked. I stepped closer and said the words that had taken me a decade to gather, "Anywhere I choose." It's strange how distance can reveal the shape of things more clearly than closeness ever could. From the quiet hills of Christopher's estate, I could see my past for what it really was. Not just a web of old wounds, but also a garden of miscommunications, of small betrayals left unspoken, and of love expressed in all the wrong ways. I had spent weeks in silence, in healing, in learning to inhabit my own skin without needing to shrink or explain. The whispers had quieted, the headlines shifted to the next social mystery. Christopher had remained near but never imposing. He gave me what no one else had, ever given freely: space. But a message from home shattered the stillness. It was from my mother. "Your father's in the hospital. Nothing critical, just come if you can." I stared at the screen for a long time before moving. Christopher saw the shift in my expression the moment I entered the kitchen. He poured coffee into a ceramic mug and placed it gently on the counter. "Do you need me to come with you?" I shook my head. "I think I need to do this alone." He nodded. "Call if you need anything." I kissed him on the cheek. "Thank you for everything." The drive back was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums under your ribs. The city didn't feel as suffocating anymore. It felt smaller, like something I could hold instead of something that once held me. At the hospital, I found my father in a private room, propped against a mountain of pillows, grumbling about the food. His face lit up when I entered. "There's my girl," he said, voice a little rough. "Miss Fancy Dress." I laughed despite myself. "Hi, Dad." We talked for a while, about the shop, about a leaky faucet, about how the nurses had no sense of humor. But then he looked at me, and something shifted. "You did the right thing," he said suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "Leaving. Saying yes to that life. You were never meant to stay stuck here." I sat down slowly. "Then why did you never say that before?" He looked at his hands. "Because if you left, it meant we had to look at what we'd done. Or not done. It was easier to pretend you were fine." His honesty surprised me more than any outburst ever could. "You didn't need to be the quiet one, Amelia," he added. "We just needed you to be." I swallowed hard. "I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable," I said. "But comfort isn't love," he replied. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cause a little discomfort, like you did." Before I left his room, he squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." Outside, the late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. And yet, I hesitated at the front steps of my old house. The door creaked as I entered, and I was greeted by silence, until I saw her. Elena, sitting on the living room couch, still as a portrait. No makeup, hair undone, wearing the sweatshirt she used to steal from me in high school. We stared at each other, then she said, "You look different." "So do you." She motioned to the couch across from her. "Sit." I did. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, in a small voice, she said, "I hated you for a little while. I know. I wanted you to fail, to come back ruined. So, I could feel like the world still made sense." I waited. She looked down at her lap. "But you didn't." "No." "I've been jealous of you for a long time," she admitted. "That startled me. You've had everything I never could master. Patience, quiet strength, people who trust you instantly. I had to perform to get attention. You just had to be. Elena, you've always been the star." "But I was afraid of burning out," she whispered. "And when you started to shine, it reminded me that I never really owned the light. I was just reflecting it. And you were holding the source the whole time." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I never wanted to outshine you." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it worse. You were never trying. You were just living. And that's what I forgot how to do." She looked at me then, really looked, and her eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Amelia, for the way I treated you, for mocking you, for never letting you grow." I reached for her hand. "I forgive you." We sat there, two sisters unraveling years of silent competition. Later, she said, "Are you going back?" I nodded. "Yes, but I wanted to come back first, to see Dad. And you." She smiled faintly. "So, is he your boyfriend now?" I blushed. "Kind of. Of course, you always did pick the quiet ones, just not usually billionaires." We both laughed. Before I left, she walked me to the door. "You know," she said, "you wore that dress, like it was made for you." I turned. It was made for me. I just didn't know it until someone reminded me. As I drove away from the house, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was carrying it forward, healed, lighter, and ready for what was next. It had been exactly 3 months since the night of the gala. 3 months since I stood at the top of a grand staircase, heart pounding, hand on the arm of Christopher Hartwell, and walked into a room where I was never meant to belong, and belonged anyway. And now I stood before a smaller room, a room with no chandeliers, no orchestra, no couture gowns. Just a long table, a row of chairs, and a group of people looking at me not with curiosity or judgment, but respect. The board of the Caroline Hawthorne Foundation had invited me to take my place, as heir, yes, but also as visionary. The house by the coast had been converted into a haven for young women who felt like I once did, overlooked, unsure, quiet in a world that rewarded the loud. The estate now funded scholarships, internships, and small businesses started by women who just needed someone to believe in them. I sat at the head of the table, Christopher beside me, not as my shield or voice, but as someone who believed in mine, and I spoke calmly, clearly, with purpose. After the meeting, as the board members trickled out, a young assistant approached me. She couldn't have been more than 22, her arms full of folders and her voice tentative. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. I looked up. "For what?" "For showing me it's okay to be quiet, to take up space in your own way." I smiled. "You don't have to be loud to be heard," I said gently. She nodded, her eyes shining. Later that afternoon, I walked through the garden outside the foundation house, once Caroline's private retreat. The roses were in bloom, the wind gentle, the sky crisp and blue. Christopher joined me, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You know," he said, "you've made this place more alive than it ever was." "It was already alive," I replied. "It just needed someone to open the doors." He smiled. "You're incredible, Amelia." I looked at him. This man who had once been a stranger on a park bench, and now knew me better than I knew myself. "So are you," I said. "But you always knew that." He chuckled. "Not always. Not until you handed me a piece of hope, on a bookmark." We sat on the garden bench together, the scent of lavender around us. "I've been thinking," he said, more serious now. "About what?" "About what's next." I raised an eyebrow. "For you?" "For us." The word warmed me. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple velvet box. My breath caught. "No grand gesture," he said. "No press, no announcements. Just this moment. Just you." He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a single opal. Soft, glowing, understated, beautiful, like the girl in the navy dress. "Marry me," he said. Not because we're in headlines or because we're some fairy tale, but because every version of the future I imagine has you in it. Tears rose before I could stop them. "Yes," I whispered. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Later that evening, I wrote a final entry in the journal I'd started months ago. Before the gala, before the chaos, before the truth. I used to think I needed to be louder, prettier, flashier to be seen. I thought my worth was measured in the attention I received, or didn't. But it turns out, all I needed was one person to really look, to see me for who I am, not who I was told to be. And once I saw myself through his eyes, I never wanted to disappear again. Elena came to visit a week later. She brought flowers and an apology. We talked like sisters again, not rivals, not shadows of each other. Just two women who had survived the world in different ways and were finally learning how to support one another without competition. "I saw the article," she said, sitting on the porch swing with me. "You're everywhere, but in the best way. I'm just doing what I can." "You're doing more than that," she said. "You're changing things." She hesitated. "Can I be honest?" "Always. I'm happy for you. Truly. And I want to figure out who I am too, not just the version that gets applause." I reached for her hand. "Start small," I said. "Start with who you are when no one's watching." We swung in silence for a while, letting the past dissolve like morning mist. That night, Christopher and I hosted a small dinner at the Foundation House. Just a few friends, a few new faces, and family. No cameras, no fanfare, just laughter, candles and warmth. And I wore the navy dress again, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because it reminded me of who I was when this all began. The girl who stood tall, even when the world expected her to shrink. The girl who was mocked and then remembered. The girl who walked into a ballroom and rewrote her story, one quiet step at a time, from mockery to majesty, and this time, the crown was mine.